And we're live. Well, welcome to another edition of Life is People. And well, this conversation has been, I would say, 2 years in the making. So, and I know that time is precious, so I don't want to sort of waste any interest. I think most people listening to this conversation know exactly who you are. But how are you doing tonight, David?
Good, good. Always good. Always good.
Fantastic. Well, like I say, we haven't got, we're knowing that time is sort of precious. I really want to kind of start this right back to the beginning. So let's take me to I'm going to hand this over to you. What was if you could describe the David Irwin who was 10 years old? I mean, what kind of person would you be? And the secondary question to that is, where did your fascination with engineering begin? Is that a family thing, or was it just something you kind of got into as a kid?
I think probably the 10-year-old David Irvine. I've always been questioned everything. So when I was at school, like I would have a book about the seashore and correct the teachers if they were wrong and stuff like that. And then when I went to college, I was a bit of a pain in the arse because I was always wondering why things happen and like why did that differential equation appear? What does it really represent? What's it for? All this sort of stuff. So I've always been a kind of questioner and liked physics and engineering just because I didn't like English because I wanted to get an answer and then be able to go back and say, well, that's why that answer came. You could do all this stuff. Whereas English and stuff always felt was open to interpretation. I mean, if I read Shakespeare, which I've never done, I've only ever read one fiction book in my life. I don't read fiction, but if I read something, I could never understand why my interpretation would be wrong. So I didn't like all that stuff. So I preferred physics. And probably just quite a quiet, inquisitive person. Then probably got a bit louder and noisier because I went to college and it was the very first time they did a student union. So I became the student union president and threw all the teachers out for a few days, and just did things like that and put CND stickers on the blackboard so the teacher would bring it round when he was teaching us about electricity and stuff. So I think when I was at college, it was probably all the teachers thought I was the person least likely to succeed, which I quite liked because I later had to interview one of those guys for a job, and that was good. That was good fun, putting him through his paces. Just inquisitive, I think, just like a normal inquisitive wee fella.
Kind of my fascination is, because I think we're kind of like in the same sort of generation, really. And what fascinates me about this is that it's kind of a real description of what the UK was like in the time. We're talking the early 80s, and that's what I'm saying. And I know the word early kind of programming thing. So I'm fascinated to know really, because there you are going to college, and you kind of really put it's a starting point of this journey that you're going down, where it leads eventually to Maidsafe and the Safe network. But you started off with computer engineering. Now at the time, that's what I'm saying. The point I'm trying to get across is, as you know, it was a very outsider thing to do. I mean, there were a few people that were doing it. So what kind of, at that point, made you sort of think, I want to actually sort of do this, and sort of saw the potential? What did you see the potential in it? Because at the time, as I say, I mean, a few of us could understand it, but what put me off from maybe carrying it on any further, because by the time I left school, I was no more interested in it, was because of the thought process of like, well, I've got to get a job. And like I say, in the 80s in England and in the UK at that time was a very much, you had to get a job. So I didn't really sort of see a future in it. So I'm fascinated to know what you saw at that time and made you sort of actually continue down that path.
Well, I started actually off as a mechanical engineer. So I did an apprenticeship as a mechanical maintenance engineer, just fixing things when they broke, in a glass making factory that made bottles. They made all of the milk bottles in Europe, actually. But during that time, I got kicked out of the house when I was 17 or something, and I couldn't really afford my rent, so I had to come up every week with some way of making rent. So there was a suggestion scheme. So I would invent something every week. I'd look about and think, oh, well, we could do this or you could do that. So I could get £20 every 2 weeks, and that paid my rent. So then when I finished my apprenticeship, I went and did electrical and electronic engineering, because it always fascinated me about how, like, transistors and things like that. And during that time, I seen a girl that was actually going out ahead a computer, and I thought, oh, that's quite clever. And then realised that this was like a big pneumatic or hydraulic circuit all you could actually do it inside this computer. And that intrigued me because I thought you could do amazing things. And immediately I thought, oh, you could get a disk and call it what, why, where, when, and give one to a dentist, one to a doctor, and get them to just explain to the computer what they're doing and how, and then pull all the disks together. And that would be quite a good way of getting knowledge. So that was the sort of early days. And then I did an electronics course and get an interview with Thorn, actually, as a computer graduate engineer. I didn't know anything about computers. So I was building computers for a company called SCI, so doing like logic analysis of the circuit board, like the DMA channels and the DMA chips and memory and all the rest of it. So when I went for that interview, I knew everything about pinouts and like RS232 connectors and all this sort of stuff. So just silly stuff like 2, 3, 4, and 5 being send, receive, clear to send, request to send, and all that sort of business. And I got the job, and they were like, oh, and it was IBM Model 30 at the time. They're like, you know about computers? And I was like, yeah, sort of, I think. But they were convinced I was some kind of expert. So I took a computer home under my arm on a Friday night with a DOS manual. But the Monday morning I knew how computers worked. So that was the first time I touched a floppy disk, actually, which was a 2.5 inch disk at the time, but a 3.5 inch. But so I had to learn quite quickly. But the way I learn is as soon as I did that, then I was like, well, what is Ethernet? How does that work? And then it's Manchester encoding, CSMACD type things. So you're looking at this carrier wave with things. I was like, why has it got to be like 100 meters, and then you've got a 50 ohm resistor on it, and then worked out things like, you know, the minimum Ethernet packet, and then so what size was 1 bit in an Ethernet frame, and I was calculating it. It was 2.5 times the distance to the moon was this thing, but the cable was 100 meters long. Well, so I just dove into it like that, and then when I was a graduate, the guys hated it because they used to call me Data, like Johnny Five. Every time I went near somebody, I'd ask them all the questions about ADA and parallel processing and what chips are different from other chips, and then I would like take hard drives to bits and move them about and stuff. So I kind of enjoyed that, and then all of a sudden it transpired that I was okay at that kind of stuff, and ended up going to do the kind of more senior consulting role. So when larger companies were having problems with networks or whatever, I would go and fix it. But it was, I was fixing things that I'd never come across before. I remember it was in a place, 4 companies had come together to create the Mercury one-to-one phone system, and they just cabinet full of Novell servers, and they broke. And I was there with discs in my mouth, moving them about these machines. And the CEO came in and seen me, and after it, he said, that was unbelievable watching that, because how do you know how all those things work? And I said, I've never seen those things in my life. I just had to work it out. So I've always been fascinated with hugely complex problems. And it's funny, I don't see ever problems, I just see interest. I suppose it's somebody that likes doing crosswords. You know, somebody gives you a crossword and oh, that's really interesting. Where other folk would say, oh, that's impossible, you can't do that. But for me, I don't think anything's impossible. So because something's not been done doesn't mean it can't be done. And that mentality I can't understand. So I kind of have always liked throwing myself in. Like when I went to sailing, I had to become a yacht master ocean and all this sort of stuff like immediately. And sort of like going to college, I had to be the president of the student. So always really thought if I'm doing something, learn it and do it properly, you know, and learn the deep aspects of it. So computing for me was all about NAND gates and like how all these NAND gates came together to form logic circuits, and making those logic circuits look just like hydraulic or pneumatic valves, and an OR gate or a series AND gate type thing. And then looking at that in the realm of the mechanical world, and there's an actual universal flux equation, which is all to do with the level of flux in a system in the area divided by length and the diameter of it, which from that universal equation comes force equals mass times acceleration, and voltage is current times resistance. So the kind of fundamental equations of electrical and physics and engineering come from the same equation. And that fascinated me because Scotland was always a brilliant mechanical engineering place. And then computing came along, and I thought, we're going to be brilliant at this. But everybody was told, oh, computers are very difficult. You can't do that. You can't work with computers. So I don't know. So I always that fascination about why do people not understand? I mean, the other day, the lassie that I live with, she was turning something. Probably should say it, but she was saying, "What way is do you turn this to get it on?" Listen, you're opening a valve, and every single valve, every single jar, every single thing that you turn has got a right hand. They'll all work the same way. You'll always go anti-clockwise to take on, clockwise to put on. And so many people will be like, what way does this not go? The same way as every other thing you've ever turned in your life. There's only very few things of left-hand beds, like acetylene bottles. And so it amazes me that things that are kind of obvious, folk accept it, you turn stuff, but you never know what way to turn it, but you're always turning it the same way. At every single thing, you turn it anti-clockwise, take it off, clockwise, put it on. And these things have always bewildered me. So I think it's a bit like kind of Billy Connolly jokes. The funny thing is seeing what everybody does all the time anyway and not realizing it, or see what they don't do and they don't realize that a slight change could be an interesting thing.
Yeah, and I think this is a very kind of overlap that many creative people have. I mean, what fascinates me about what you're doing, every step you're mentioning there is something I as an artist went through. The same sort of process, having to learn a subject and all this sort of stuff, prepared to take chances. And it's something that, again, a very common sort of overlap is the vision thing. And this is what I'm saying. I'm exploring because you started this, I'm saying, you the early sort of seeds of where all this bigger vision that you started. And I think you took a big leap, and it's a very common one I meet with many people who are innovators and creators. You took a leap and you jumped over and you went over to Dubai to build the networks, which was which obviously was a very sort of formative part of where you learned this vision. But what was the greatest lesson you think you learned from your time in Dubai? Because especially in relation to what you were just speaking upon then about how, like you say, we always turn things one direction. Did you find going to another culture that they approached the whole problem from a different angle? And did you learn any lessons from just being another culture and how they approached electronics?
The cultural thing, it was huge because when I worked for Thorn, I was down in London, and I always thought, man, the difference in culture here is ferocious. From Scotland, from here to Glasgow is a big difference, but going out to it was Saudi I went to, and the culture there was radically different. And initially I was disgusted by it and thought, this is horrible. And then after a while you realise, well, that's how these people live, and that's how they've lived for a while. Where they'll go to or where they'll evolve to, I don't know. And then you kind of look at other cultures like Chinese and different, and everybody's quite different, but people tend to, what I've found is people tend to judge everyone else based on their own principles and their own culture without having, and it's a bit like the kind of famous poet around about here, Rabbie Burns, and it's like, never judge me until you've walked a mile in my shoes. And some of that stuff is very clever, because to judge someone else without being them is actually really a sign of stupidity. So, and you see it quite a lot. I think the biggest cultural difference I've noticed in my life is kind of social media thing. And I was doing something on Twitter last night. Some person was saying, "Oh, this is terrible, these trolls," and I was like, "Why? Why is it terrible?" People say bad things, and why does that bother you? Or is it only bothering the first people that go on social media because they're looking for something and they're getting the complete opposite? Why is it a terrible thing? And so the cultural thing for me is really interesting, because I think there's far too much judgment of others, and you could just, people do see everything from their own perspective so much, and find it very hard to kind of sit back and look and just imagine you're a blade of grass watching stuff going past and think, oh well, you know, that dog went and peed in that tree and that one didn't. I wonder, you know, it's, things are what they are, and we're all kind of really, I think we're all much more connected than what we realise, and we're all very similar. I think we're all millimeters away from being a psychopathic murderer, and we're all probably the same millimeters away from being a sort of perfect Gandhi-like thing. And I think a lot of people don't realise it. And you know, folks say to me, "Oh, you're quite a nice guy. You're honest and moral and stuff like that." And I keep saying that I might not be in a second. You know, or a minute from now, I could have gone cuckoo and killed somebody or done something worse. And it's a kind of strange thing, I think, how people judge other people and why they even feel a need to. You know, it's like if you see a leaf and it blows across your window left to right, you don't kind of think, why did that not go right to left? It did go left to right. And some person might tell you a lie, other people may walk past, or people may shake your hand. So the cultural thing for me is it was quite an interesting, it was good to see it. I love the fact that I went to see a different culture, even if it was one that I particularly didn't enjoy, just to be able to understand life from a totally different perspective. And that, I think that teaches you quite a lot as well. And it's good for folk to move about. And it's a strange thing now that we're all learning to judge everybody by, and I don't mean to be rude to folk, but we're judging everybody now by a kind of a USA mentality. It's like we're all being fed a kind of whatever's the culturally acceptable thing, and you see all this stuff about racism and sexism and some otherism, and you think, man, I don't know how to be racist, because if somebody came in here and they were some different colour or whatever, it would be like as if they were a different height. So I don't know not to use certain words or certain things. I just speak to people, and then you look and you see, oh no, you can't, you've got to do this, otherwise you're being this sexist or racist thing. But what is that sexist or racist thing if it's not an honest thing? So if I'm thinking, oh, there's a brown person, and I say something, whatever's politically correct, the honest thing would have been to say there's a brown person. The politically correct thing may have been to say another thing. I don't know what you're supposed to say, but so it's better to be dishonest than it is to be honest. And these are the kind of conundrums that I see that you can have sometimes, that all the judgment that people make based on some set of rules that they have against other people who don't know what those rules are quite strange, because when you come from a small place in the country, people are just people. There's no difference between any of them. There's big ones and short ones and fat ones and thin ones and different coloured ones and different sex and different, and they're just all people. But then you have to learn, when you get into kind of bigger culture, society, or like social thing, that they're not just people, that these people, that person's get this and you're supposed to call them that, and this person. And then all of a sudden you're kind of being told to judge people so that you don't judge them. And you weren't judging them in the first place anyway. So there is a lot of weirdness, I think, with cultural differences. And I just prefer a kind of honest thing. And even if somebody's saying something quite nasty, like using nasty words about somebody because of their colour or their sex or something, I prefer they did use the nasty words. And then you could say to them, why are you saying that? Rather than, let's hang that person or whatever. It's like, well, that's like a child putting their hand in a fire. Don't hang them for it. Like, teach them, don't put your hand in the fire. It's not a good thing. Don't call that person that, because you'll probably knock your teeth out and you deserve it. So I don't know. I think it's quite an interesting thing, because different cultures have different levels of what they would consider to be honest or moral. I mean, it can be morally acceptable in like Saudi to drown your daughter in a swimming pool, which for us would be unbelievably bad. But that's the way they are, and so we can't ever understand that. But obviously, people that come from that culture do understand it, and they'll hopefully that changes, because you shouldn't go murdering anybody or animals or whatever. But those things I find those things all quite interesting, but we should be able to explore them with an honest, open mind, and that's important.
And I think what's fascinating to me is, like I say, there are certain things about us as a species that we find. It's almost like the Tower of Babel, sort of analogy, that it was language that divided us, but the people that are finding, and that's what I find fascinating between, say, artwork crosses all. You can go anywhere in the world, people appreciate art. Same with music, and you are again, and you're going down, exploring your creative area, and you're going into computer language, which is saying, you've just spoken about going to Saudi, but you could be sat in a room. And you may not be able to speak the same language, and it's the same reflection I saw maybe at Troon when I went there. You can have anyone from anywhere around the world, and you can all basically work on a computer language that is universal, and that must be very liberating to someone like you, and especially what you're saying, because you're into a very pure form, and that's what I'm trying to sort of find out from you. When you did go to Saudi, did you find that working in this pure form of language, did you find that the different cultural elements, and do you find this maybe now at True, do you find that people from different cultures bring different experiences and different viewpoints into that pure language that actually shape it? Or is that something, the solid form, that it's almost unshapable? I mean, I'm fascinated with that whole purity of the computer language.
Yeah, I think there's lots of different aspects to it, because there's some cultures, I think, which are much more logical. There's other cultures which are very rigid, work 8 hours, and exactly 8 hours, and not 7:59 or 8:01. There's, like us, we've got this kind of, I don't know, it's a kind of Scottish Presbyterian thing where we just work ourselves into the ground. There's all sorts of different things, but they quickly merge. They really quickly merge. When people join the team, they're a bit different. Their language might be a bit different, and they quickly join in. And just, I think we all absorb a little bit of each other, when you're working quite closely. And it's quite good. I think the folk that we've got working for us, and mostly the folk we've had working for us, are that complete. We had a couple of folk that were into the kind of real massively politically correct thing, and it was like, I don't think that joke was very funny. Oh, really? Well, don't laugh. So, but when, like, the team that worked there, they're all really quite close, and we used humor a lot to say, I don't think that's right. We use humor to do it, and humor is actually a really kind of positive way of affirming that maybe something could be changed, maybe something could be a wee bit better. But the other good thing about computers, I think it's an engineering thing as well, even from like the 90s and Slashdot and stuff like that. You'd have extremely, if somebody reading two engineers talking to each other over Skype or something, like typing, they would think, my God, those guys hate each other. Look at the way their language is very focused, firm, but that's just two engineers working on a problem, trying to find the solution, and they tend to be quite hard on each other. But it's a bit like, I used to box as well, so it's a bit like when you're boxing. After it's finished, you're both very friendly, and some of the kind of debates that engineers have are a bit, they look unfriendly, but they're actually friendly all the way through, even though they're inordinately critical of each other, because they're trying to find the answer. And it's brilliant when you see it, because when the answer comes, whatever side anybody was on, the answer's always in the middle. So nobody goes, I lost that, or both sides will be, we have found the answer. And that is a really, really powerful thing, because it's a bit like a Republican and a Democrat debating a particular big government, small government, and they come up with something at the end, and both of them can just go, that's the answer. But of course, in politics and life, that doesn't happen, because there's ego and all sorts involved, rather than this search for a kind of pure truth. And even if that truth is based on all of our knowledge, and all of our knowledge was maybe based on stuff that was wrong, like, you know, we don't know how zero works, we don't know how infinity works, maths is a bit of a problem to prove logically. There's the kind of Gödel's inconsistency theorem. There's a good chance that all of our knowledge is based on something that's not right. But given these rules that we know about, it's great when you can get an answer that, when you get a couple of logical people, or a couple of people that are creative people that are just trying to find like a few bars of a song that's missing. The you know, guitarist saying I want this, and the drummer saying I want this, and then you get it, and everybody knows that's it. And it didn't belong to anybody, and it doesn't belong to anybody now. But it doesn't disagree with anybody that was involved in the conversation. So I think that's good. And so the kind of cultural thing for us, sort of, I think maybe the team, I don't know, it might be because of the way we work pretty hard. So you kind of get in there and you've got to get this job done, that the culture goes round the team very quickly and gets sort of assimilated, like the Borg or something. And we all learn from each other, I think. And it's an important thing for, as we're growing teams, that, you know, as the team grows, you always want somebody better than the average member of the team is just now, so that the average capability of the company increases. So if you get somebody worse than the average, you bring down the average. So it's something that we're always looking for, is bringing people that will know more than us about a certain, at least part of the system. They'll know more than anybody else, and they'll be able to come in and go, that's wrong, that's wrong, that's wrong. And we can say, well, why are you saying that? And then figure it all out. And that's fantastic. And that sort of search for truth is pretty good. And I wish it would exist between projects more. We don't really have time to look at other projects and work them out and see if there's, but you kind of tend to see that we're all trying to go somewhere and improve the world. Hopefully that's what everybody's doing. There's probably some folk that are just trying to fill their own pockets, but for those people, I would just give them all the money they want and not let them even have to con folk, because, you know, they could choke on that as far as I'm concerned. But the rest of us are trying to move the world forward a little bit. So why should I care, or you care, if I move it forward or you move it forward? And what difference should it make to our grandchildren what one of us did it? Because none of us should be remembered. We should, you know, you're here and you're. So I think from that perspective, I think we do the right thing. And like in Maidsafe as the team, I think we've got the kind of right approach. It's just we want to find, like a physicist, you want to find what's the next unknown thing. Let's solve that next unknown problem. And that's really interesting. It's really difficult with the pressure that we're under, but once the whole thing's up and launched, then that job will become like infinitely more interesting, because we'll be able to sit back and say, breathe, take a couple of breaths, maybe even a cup of tea, and now think about this problem. Whereas just now we do a lot of it very quickly. We're on hangouts like this, maybe 4, 5, 6 hours a day, and then you're coding for another 10 hours a day. And the hangouts are very hard because there's a bunch of folk just arguing and debating and trying to find this, what is it we're looking for, and we go around the houses. And that's quite interesting. But it's also interesting then when you, as you say, when you go elsewhere and folks say, how long will it be to do the next little bit? And you think, well, we don't really know, because we're answering all these things. We know the answers to all the issues that we've got, but we don't know exactly how they'll implement. And that is a kind of interesting part of the job. I'm quite fascinated by that. How to communicate what you're doing, and our forum is amazing for that, because I think the vast majority of people understand this isn't easy. It's never been done. You can't say, it's almost like sending the first rocket to the moon. It's like, yeah, we're going to get it. We know we're going to get it, and we're going to have to do it this decade in the 60s or whatever. And, you know, we'll do it. But you don't know exactly how many bolts that rocket will have, how much exact fuel it's going to have, what exactly the telemetry of it. And people want that, you know, away at the beginning of a project. And that's where I think you sometimes get the, I don't know if it's the kind of more unfortunate side of humanity. It's like, teach me Greek, and can you do it in one sentence, please? Explain Latin to me like I'm a 5-year-old. And you think, no, you can't do that. You can't explain everything like you're a 5-year-old. And if you're a 5-year-old, you wouldn't want to know this crap anyway. So there's that kind of, there's almost like a desire, and I think a lot of it's to do with money having become this product now that people use to basically not work and beat other folk up with. That you should be able, I think, to demand that the person you're having a conversation with about a subject has a reasonable knowledge before they engage in that conversation with you, especially if they're going to tell you you're wrong. You know, because that's always quite a good bit of you folks saying, that'll never work. What? Well, I don't know, but it just won't work. Well, yeah, well, you could be right there. You could be wrong.
Yeah, I mean, I again, David, this is a very much overlap between, and I try to use the analogy of you know, from an artist's point of view, but you know, there you are with a blank canvas, and you're quite like you've spoken upon. You have a vision, and people say, okay, well, tell me your vision. You're like, oh, okay, well, what I want to do is I want to paint this scene, and then like you say, and that's not. It's understandable why humans are like that. They're very eager to get to know the vision, but in that vision, this is where the overlaps do, and I think this is all part of the creative process, you know, whether it's engineering, art, music, or anything else. It's the point that you just spoke upon about making that tough call. You know, at times you've got to make a tough call and go, it's all part of the creative process, because sometimes you can almost go down one level, one avenue, and you just suddenly, for whatever reason, and that's the something that's, you know, that happens in that moment, but you change directions. For instance, I remember literally speaking to you at the time when you decided to, you know, to switch from C++ to Rust. That was a tough call, you know, and but that's but this is the you know, the drive of what I'm trying to say. So when you were in that, for instance, when you were in that moment of making a tough call between, you know, going from you know, some C++ to Rust, what was the driving force behind you sort of, you know, thinking, you know, I've got to push this ahead and do it? Because it was a really sort of, I remember the kind of almost the mental agility you were going through about, you know, this. I knew this is going to be a tough call. And what was it particularly in Rust that you saw that, you know, you felt could really sort of push the project forward?
Basically, it was down to safety and code clarity, and the thought of, we'll move on from this eventually. All of us, everybody involved in Maidsafe at some point will move on. Everybody involved in the community here will move on, but the project should always go forward. And rather than leaving a hugely complex bag of stuff that nobody would understand, is you want to be able to have it as simple as possible to get as many people. There's a thing in coding which is a particularly bad thing, and you find it a lot in the more complex languages, the C++ type languages, where people write this piece of code and say, haha, nobody else in the world will understand it. And I say, delete it. And I've always deleted code that looks like that. And people hate that, but it's a sort of ego thing. But the reality of the situation is, you're building something for people tomorrow. You're not building it for us today. We're building it for people tomorrow. And so you want to give the people tomorrow, and that could be other companies doing the safe core, it could be us continuing to, I don't know, but you want to give those people that's coming something that they can really use, they can understand, they can improve on, and they can have this immediate ownership of it while they're working with it. It's almost like owning a house. It's a kind of custodian thing. And it's it's kind of about doing the right thing. You know, the system is better now. We can make so many big changes to it really, really quickly, which we couldn't have done before. So it was going to give us that agility. But for me, it was more about who's going to be using this in 10 years, or like this thing will it probably change language again, but who's going to be using it in the future? Because it's not about, and this was a thing when folk are like, launch, 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 and you think, well, we could launch something maybe a couple of years ago, which we'd never have been able to upgrade properly. Nobody would have ever understood it. And then all the people that are shouting launch would have been happy for a minute and then realize we just sprayed TNT on mosquitoes. The problems just got worse. You know, the thing that was going to give us the privacy and security and freedom only gave us a glimpse and then disappeared. And it would actually be a bad thing, because then it would be saying to people, don't try and do that. These guys did it for 10 years and they failed. Don't try and do privacy. And, you know, there's so many people will say you can't get privacy, security and freedom, which is kind of crazy, because I think when people say you can't something, it's kind of bizarre. It's almost like, can you guarantee? No, I can't guarantee anything. But the decision then was push through the C++ thing and launch it, and it's going to be unbelievably hard to improve this, and it's going to be incredibly hard to employ people that have got a clue about understanding it, and it will be full of memory bugs. It will just be, I think Mozilla and Chrome, they're always fighting these memory bugs. So it was a decision about, do we want this instant gratification and satisfaction and a bunch of cash, or do we want to do this job properly? And what is this job? It's not a product. It's not about Safecoin price going up or something like that. It's not about those things. It's about fulfilling a vision, and that vision of an internet that allows us all as people to be people, and individuals to be an individual, and groups to be their group, and to be private and secure. And that is a bigger thing. And even that switch, it didn't really happen as much as I thought it would. I thought a lot of the community and a lot of kind of engineers and other projects would be, look at those people, they're idiots, they don't know what they're doing. We didn't actually get much of that at all, which I was surprised. I thought there would be a lot of that. But we also, I don't think, really got the point across as why are we doing this? It's not just because we can't do it in C++. You could do anything you can write in Rust, you can write in C++, and vice versa. It's just about, do you want to build a house out of bricks and mortar, or do you want to build it out of clay and straw? Because we've been using clay and straw for years and it works. And when we did that, a lot of the engineers that were C++ engineers, they were the ones that hated it. They hated it because they were losing their ability to be, I don't know how you describe this, but kind of losing their ability to have this superpower that a normal human wouldn't dare to try and achieve. And I think that was an interesting thing, because even when you see people that were very logical fell to pieces if you took their magic wand off them. And it's like, well, that's not an engineer. You know, an engineer, if you've got a job and you've got a hammer and somebody says, stop using that hammer, here's another device, like an electronic hammer, you're going to use that. Now, an engineer should be able to calculate, this is going to be better, or I better fully evaluate this before I make a decision. But I found some of the engineers were actually quite surprisingly not happy about switching to something that would be more understood by more people, you know. And that was a pretty interesting thing. It was quite a sad thing in some ways as well, because people you thought were engineers turned out to be, just teach me one thing and I'll become an expert in it, and when I've reached that expert stage, I'll be an expert. And you kind of think, there's no expert stage. You might know something about, you might be great at building dry staying dikes, but everybody's using bricks and cement now. So there was some interesting aspects to that. And I knew when I was making that decision that it was going to increase the length of the project. I knew it would. But I also knew when we got to near launch where we are now, we'll iterate very quickly now. So if we see a problem, we can change huge lumps of the code. And I mean, we're doing a massive change in routing just now, and it's probably about 4 weeks work, and it's an enormous change, and that's ripping the guts out of the system and replacing them. If we had C++, we'd have been looking at a year to do that. And we've got 3 guys, it'll take a month, and it's almost done. So it was a tough call, but it was a right call. But I think it's just one of those things you have to do. It's just, sometimes you might even have to change teams or change CEOs. That's something that's always open to the company to do that. So I think you're following the vision. I'm more concerned about the vision than I am about anybody's salary or ego or the price of lead. I couldn't care less about the price of lead or the price of whatever is the price of something or other. And so I don't actually even read the Safecoin stuff in our forum, which I've got all those threads muted, so I don't see people talking about like money and all that, because I think, well, that'll happen when it's supposed to happen, and hopefully it all will happen for the right reasons, and that it will be an enabler for people. I think if it went to the kind of perspective that some people would become mega rich, and well, what is it we're trying to change then? What is it that this whole community is trying to change? We shouldn't be doing all this arbitrage and bizarro trading-y stuff. To me, we should be trying to change the way that our relationship with sharing resources and services between people throughout the world. We should be looking to change that, not to try and satisfy a kind of want for power that some folk have. And I would like to see a different approach where people that don't have a house get a house, and people that don't have food get food, and then have a look at, like, if there's a food bank next to you and you're sitting with a few £1,000s in your pocket, I think you should shoot yourself. You're doing something wrong, or else you should go and apologise to every one of those people in the food bank, saying, sorry, I've got money and I'm not giving it to you. I don't know what to spend my money on. So I think there's all sorts of interesting things here, but a good side of that is it doesn't really affect me, because my job is to this engineering thing, and then to make Maidsafe, obviously, a profitable company, but profitable to the world first, to provide value to everyone, and for that value to be recognised and people to get paid for it. And that's fantastic, that's good. But what I don't want ever to happen is I don't want to ever to stamp on someone. I don't want to ever to hurt the small guy, or whatever that phrase is. And that's why for us, it's great for us if we see other people doing projects and we can say, well, that's fantastic, that's great, these people are doing these different projects, and try, like, if we had cash, we would be supporting hundreds of projects all over the place. In my opinion, would be throw money at some of them, just get them going, just let folk do things and see what happens, and expect 90% of them to fail. Expect that, and say, thank you for this project, it didn't work, can you tell us what you found out, and tell everyone. And that's an important thing to drive into the kind of, I think the kind of safe community is really, like, because we'll be doing all these different apps, so we're not really doing apps as such, but if, say, the browser project that's going on just now, if it just didn't work, if something went badly wrong with it, it would be great to be able to say, let's tear that to pieces and figure out what happened, or why did that not work, and let's tell everybody else, don't do that, like, that didn't work in that particular situation at that time with these people. Because that's why there isn't so many aeroplane crashes, because aeroplane crashes have been quite unique in that they've been completely open as much as possible as to why that plane crashed, so that the next plane doesn't have that problem. And if we could do that in the IT community and the kind of larger community, if we could get to a place where we can not just now, there's things you see people where one project's happening, they want another one to fail. That's bizarre. But if we could get to a place where we could all be doing projects, so I'm doing A, you're doing B, and you think B's right, and I think A's right, and somebody does C and that's right, and then we both go, shit, let's go and have a look at that. Or I failed with A and I couldn't do it. That I could sit down and give you a list and say, Tim, here's all the stuff that I did, and I think this part was wrong, but I'm not sure, but that definitely caused this to happen. So that you could say, well, that's good because I'm not going to do that in my project. So it would be great when we get all these projects running to have some kind of mechanism for a kind of place to celebrate the failures, if you want to. Failure is quite a kind of negative word, but to celebrate the things that you found out we shouldn't do. That's what I would love to see, because I think if you could have that, you're going to have such a solid ecosystem that the projects that do come out of it would be amazing. And I kind of was disappointed to see some of that stuff when you see things like that DAO failure and like an Ethereum thing. You think, man, that was all like smoke and mirrors, and things happened, and things were, you know, it was like people said one thing and folk were lying about something else. And I was trying, look, it obviously didn't work. There's a problem with that thing. It just didn't work. Could we tell us why it didn't work? And exactly, could we just explain it to everybody? It didn't work. It didn't mean all the folk that were doing it were idiots. It just means there's something in this complicated thing that they didn't see. So it would be great to share that kind of stuff. But it's one of the, I think it's one of the problems with, again, with the money involved, like because there was money in that, there's all these folks saying, I lost money, I want you to die. You know, and it kind of loses, like sometimes when you have so much money involved in something, that it loses the reason for that thing. What was the reason for that thing? So it looked to me like the reason for that thing was quite an honourable one. It was like, how can we fund different people to do different stuff in a kind of nice, non-government, non-regulated way, which is going to come with a ton of human problems. But at least if there was a mechanical way to do it, that would have been fantastic. So the vision there was probably really a nice one, but the cataclysm surrounding it of hurt feelings, and you know, it was almost everything except where's the search for the truth. And even I've seen some technical people, I found out why this broke. I'm an AI genius, and those people are complete like morons. And they think, no, those are people who went out and tried to do something. You know, like an explorer in the early days, maybe they went to Africa and never realized that lions were there and get eaten. Well, you can't call them morons for that. They've found out lions are there. Don't go wandering into lion territory, you know, smelling of like bacon. So there's a lot of stuff like that which I think is quite interesting, and it would just be great for a lot of people just to pull back slightly and say, let's start back in visions. Let's actually look at what's your purpose? What's this purpose here that you're doing this project? Like your own project, like getting artists together and figuring out ways where people can live based on their creativity. These things are, it's a bit like the kind of pay the producer thing that I keep poking at in the forum. It's a similar sort of idea that there's a definite problem when people have got a skill that cannot be measured effectively. Like, and you can see it in music with things like Spotify, all these different things where, or you'll be measured by how many times you're streamed, and if you're streamed 900 million times a second, we'll give you half a pence every month. You know, so the measurements are all wrong. So to try and figure out ways of, well, let's just try something radically different. Just try it and see, does that work? And we need to somehow have ways of supporting those kind of things where it's not as focused on just pure cash, but somehow it's like, say like your project, say like, that's great, Tim, you're doing that. How can we help? What is it that you need? How can folk help? And you say, well, this is what I'm trying to do, and I'm trying to do it for this reason. I think that reason's great. I want to help. And it's getting this thing over so that we can actually start moving forward. You know, that society can move forward better if we can be focused on helping people achieve their victory. If you had a vision to cure malaria or something like that, sure. If we lived in a malaria country, surely people would want to do it. And the last thing I would be thinking was, when they see their child dying of malaria, how much profit could I make out your malaria drug? You know, and be like, could you save this child? Like, that's important. So there is all these conundrums, I think, involved in all these projects and the way that the world's moving forward just now. And as I say, I think our forum's brilliant because I think people in that forum get that. I think most of them entirely understand that's what it is, and we'll have lots more projects. There'll be lots more ideas that are thrown away, and maybe they get thrown away just now and then come back in a year and they're amazing again. It's all to do with timing, a lot. But just to be able to, I think, just to be able to sort of see the implications if you did a project not on yourself for money, but maybe on a person that's sitting near you, look and see, will it make their life better? You know, if this thing existed, would that help that person walking past the window? And if the answer to those things is yes, then it's like, well, let's just get it done. Let's get it done.
Yeah, I mean, I think the analogy is perfect. I mean, in 1999, for instance, and I suppose that's maybe how you feel about Maidsafe in general. It's how I feel about the SafeNet in general. It's a tool, and it's a tool I want to use, and that's all it. I'm not bothered about becoming Mr. The tool maker and being known for making the tool. I just want to use that as a tool that should be that. And this is the whole point. I'm sure you must feel the same thing. It's kind of like I at times, David, I sit there and go out and I look at the sky above me at times and think, we're in 2016. How has this not happened? How did this not happen in '94? Now, one of the things I really want to, I'm fascinated to know what your thoughts on this. I mean, how long do you think, and it's something we've spoken about many times, but how long do you think in the current system as we've got with the servers and everything, how long do you think we've actually got left before all this actual current internet collapses? Because I think this is the push and pull of why the Safe Network, and as you said, not only the Safe Network, but all the other projects, they're all essential because there's an inevitable collapse of just by frequency of data and going into things. So how long, from your perspective and your technical knowledge, how long do you think we've actually got?
I think that time's passed. I think the time's passed. Remember 1994, 5, Scott McNeely was coming off a plane in wherever it was, San Francisco or something. And a journalist said to him, what do you think of like people stealing other folks' information, like their private information? And he just laughed. In those days, he just laughed and said, do you think we don't have it? So I think now everybody's information has been stolen. I think anybody that kind of wants to know about everybody does know about everybody. There's hackers selling lists of old stuff, but that's all smoke and mirrors. That the people, like governments and whatnot, they've got all that information. I mean, some of these are people that can't add 2 and 2 together. You've got to give every single government department all your name and thing all the time, but they've already got that information. They've not got the ability to handle that amount of information yet. But I'm quite sure competing and warring governments would if they went to war right now. So I think we've kind of, in many ways, the server thing has already finished. I don't think there's one server network that could get broken into which would surprise anyone. I think like the NSA has been hacked, all the health records have been hacked, the driving records have been hacked, the government records have been hacked. like Obama's website and various other. So what is there actually left that hasn't been broken? And nothing. And it's a bit like I was saying earlier, yeah, everything's a right-handed thread. It's like, one way to listen and one way to tighten, and we don't realize that. And now I think we're in a situation where we don't realize pretty much everything that could be hacked has been hacked. Pretty much it's done. So it's all now about recovery. I think with safe network and whatnot, what we're trying to do is just recover now, and recover a life where we can now start sharing information from this point forward, and share that like privately, and sort of like it's time now to say, well, you knew us once, you know who I am when I was born, and maybe the medical records and bank records up to this point in time, but now I'm out of here. And I think that's kind of more likely where we are. And obviously new generations of people maybe wouldn't have that, but we've been labeled, we've been categorized, and we've been slotted in every slot that needs to be filled in every government department in all countries in the world. So the server things already actually doesn't work. And as I say, it would be interesting if somebody could come up with a particular network that has not been hacked. I don't think there is one. And so it's a bit like this realization of humanity to say it's not, because folks still say, you could do something X faster on a centralized system. And I could save myself time, but no bother putting clothes on every day as well, so what? What's your point of that statement, that you could do something faster on a system that everybody can steal from? What's the purpose what's the point in that statement? And I see it quite a lot. Folk will say, you can't do that in a decentralized system, a centralized system is better for that. I think, well, that's a glaring statement. It can't be correct in every fashion, but where is it correct? Where is it correct that you do something and then say, but you can do this particular task faster on a server, but that task will be stolen from, it will be snooped on by everybody, and everybody will see it. So yes, maybe it's faster, but is it that task anymore? What's the purpose? So there's this kind of, it's almost like a kind of, like the kind of Luddite thing, like the defense against things moving forward. Things do move forward, like maths and all the rest of it. Things move forward. You move with them, and there's people that are, you shouldn't do that. You should stick to this, and generally, it's a bit like that C++ thing I was talking about earlier on, where in C++, I think is a brilliant language and it's got amazing things. But so don't get me wrong there, but it's a bit similar. It's like, oh, I'm a server engineer. You can't take my power away from me. I could speak to people about certain 3-letter acronyms and they don't know what I'm talking about. I'm very powerful. And it's like, you're in charge of something that's been hacked. It's always been hacked. It's always going to be hacked. It will be hacked in the future. It's been hacked in the past. How smart actually are you? And I think we need to just have this realization that it's not about perhaps the end of the servers. The servers have kind of finished a while ago. I think the end of the server was the metropolitan area network before the internet. So when a single company had its own servers inside its own fences, that was where the servers belonged. When internet happened, the servers should never have got across those fences. We should have actually done it differently. And I think that's what we're doing now, is we are doing it differently, and it's obviously very difficult, but it kind of has to happen. It has to happen because we can't have every single person's secrets and wishes and thoughts and desires and ideas and innovations being so widely known to so many people and stolen from. So we have to just stop that, and we have to stop the ability to be controlled. We have to completely take that ability off of the upper layers of society. That they're not there to control us. They're there to do our collective wish, whatever that wish is, like build roads or whatever it is that we want a group of folk to do. So I think to me the servers are already finished. They've already proven themselves to be not suitable for the job, but we're already. It's like we're whipping our horses to go at 60 miles an hour. They won't last. You know, it might happen for a wee while, but they will all die. So the server to me is already a done deal. It's finished.
Well, from sort of digging into the fact that you're writing code, and like maybe I will write, or I write a piece of music and stuff like that. I have to ask you from that creative element, is there any particular? I mean, I don't know. Is there any particular piece of code or lines that you've looked at and gone, oh, you know what, I'm really actually quite proud of that. Now, nobody's ever maybe will ever know because it's just lost in this sea of code. But you as a human being, is there any moment you look at it and go, do you know what, I'm actually really that part, that little chunk I wrote there, I personally, if I die at this moment, I'm going to be very happy to leave the planet knowing I've done that moment?
No, I don't think so. When I write a bit of code, I tend to kind of write stuff and then give it to the team, and I'm always quite happy when it gets overwritten with other guys that they change bits and change spaces and stuff. So I gently, no, I think I don't think there's nothing. So when I write something, oh, that's really nice, it works, and look what it does. I'm really pleased about that, and I'm kind of happy to then give it to the guys. But then I'm happy to see it. See, code's a little different from art in that way, I suppose, because it's an idea. It's this Apple thing. If I've got an apple and I give it to you, you get the apple. But if I've got an idea and I give it to you, we've both got the idea.
Mm-hmm.
And code's a little bit like that. It's almost like it's like written music. Maybe it's like you're giving it to someone, and it's then they can play that piece of music as well. But with code, it's kind of quite good because your ownership's almost removed from it as soon as you put it into the bigger pool. You can do things to see who wrote what bits of code, and it is quite funny because I do bits and pieces of code. So like maybe data chains, for instance, I'll hammer it for a few weeks and then create that library and tests and stuff like that. But I tend to not. But it's funny though, because you get people, like there'll be people coming in the forum, and we had a guy recently in the forum and he's like, yeah, blah blah blah, I am a genius, complete thing. And sometimes what I do with these kind of folk is I look at their GitHub thing, and you see, well, they've only committed 2 pieces of code in a whole year, but they're saying that they're some kind of genius and so busy working with these other quite thingy libraries. And then I'll look at mine and it's like, I don't know, like 1900 commits. And yeah, well, I don't really say I'm a coder as much. I'm an engineer. I mean, I'll sit and solder stuff, or like carve bits of wood, or like do things. I've got kind of all sorts of mold and plastic and plaster and all sorts of stuff here, and I'm as happy with that stuff. But I kind of think there isn't really anything that I'm probably quite happy or sort of proud to have been involved, or like my continued involvement with the kind of Maidsafe libraries, that code, and say, look, that's really good now, and it's better. But a lot of times, sometimes we're in these hangouts and we'll have 4 or 5 folk, and one of them will take the keyboard, and the rest of us will basically type this, type that, type the next thing. Oh, you've missed a space, and so I think we do quite push for this kind of ownership free zone, of what we're doing, and it's sort of like this collective idea happens, which is probably quite good, because when it comes to us saying, I mean, I've done it myself. I'll look at a piece of code and I'll be in the hangouts and say, that is absolutely horrible. Who did that? And it was me. The guys will say, but you wrote that piece. All right, well, let's get it changed. It still doesn't alter the fact it's horrible. Let's remove it and replace it with something much nicer. So there is, I think there's, I'm not sure if anybody in the office actually would look at a bit of code and think that they were proud of it. I'm not sure. I'm not sure they would. I might be wrong. But I don't think so.
I think it's fascinating what you spoke upon there, Dave. It goes back to, as you know, from your band days. I mean, as you know, anyone who's played any band, whatever level,
Aye.
but there's always that one person that walks in, and they know
Aye.
what they know, that one copy.
Aye.
They've learned, Stairway to Heaven, and
Aye.
like you say,
And
they
over and
think.
over again.
And they think they're the best guitarist in the world, and like you said,
Aye.
and this is, I think, one of the things that I found, and I'm sure you find it, and when you speak to people, that you realize that anything that's going to be, like you say, like we're basically, we're just monkeys prodding in the dark into
Aye.
the void. And if you go with that idea and you understand that you have to go out with that exploration, and it's all about putting the hours in and the hours
Aye.
in. This is one of the things that I think has been forgotten, maybe in our part of the world, where we've been conditioned into this instant gratification culture,
Yeah.
where everything's got to be shine. And I think it's really inspiring and I think it's essential to people to know that, like, everything, and you were speaking upon, with the whole of the safe network, everything that's worth doing is worth doing, and it's whether it takes 2 weeks or 2 years, because we're all, like you said, we're heading towards the same direction. Now, away from the whole of the computing stuff and like this, and there's a whole sort of side to your life, and we spoke about it before, and we talk about, it's quite sort of, we talk about A roads and the best A roads in Scotland and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And we were discussing this the other day, and and I've been told this as well, and I think it's someone who experienced it. And you mentioned to me about the best way to see Scotland, which is an absolute beautiful part of the world, but you said is going along the the west coast. Now this sort of ties into your lifeboating decisions, which again I suppose we can actually say was another tough call, because do you know what I mean? It was there you were, you must have earned a bit of money, and you made a tough call to suddenly to go out and work on a lifeboat. So what was the greatest, what did you think you learned from those days? And again, kind of try to, I love to hear sort of like, I know it's hard to in a kind of conversation, but give me what the why seeing the west coast of Scotland on a boat is as special as you keep telling me it is.
Well, it's just the light and everything that works. That Scotland's actually got, I think this is true, and people can confirm, it's got the largest coastline of any country in the world, just because of the number of islands. So I lived on a boat, so I sailed about quite a lot and used to deliver boats as well. That was my holidays. And so when you're sailing up the west coast, like, the sea is different every single time. You never see the same bit of sea twice. And you've got all these islands, and because it's the west coast, like, if you're going along there in the morning, you're getting the shadow coming across the coast, and at night you're getting the sun going down and giving these kind of bright orange lights. And you just can't, if you spent your whole life sailing on a boat all around the west coast, you wouldn't see the west coast of Scotland. There's just so much of it, and it's really, really rugged. I mean, my sister was expecting twins, and I pulled up to this island, and I thought I better find a phone. Climbed up this sort of cliff and through all these like sheep, and got to the kind of only house in the island, and said, "Do you have a phone?" And they're like, "What's the phone?" Like, never mind. And off I went again, away marching back down this island and back in the boat and sailing away. And I got to Rassie or something. They did the phone. So it's like kind of going back in time as well. And you go on some of those islands, and there's a great book. I can't remember the guy who wrote it. It's a book about sailing, and he drew pictures of all these islands, and you can sail past them and look at this book, and there'll be maybe in his book a picture of a tractor in the sand rotting away, and it's there, and this book was written like decades ago. And so the whole west coast is just hugely fascinating, and the whole thing, you've got the kind of ancient cultures there. You've still got the kind of Gaelic speaking areas. When you go up to the kind of more the Gaeltacht area, like up Lewis, and was Lewis Gaelic and Skye Gaelic and all this sort of stuff, and a lot of my friends are from like kind of Gaeltacht area in Ireland, from Connemara, Carrow, and specifically in Carrow, and so there's a culture thing there as well. There's like this different culture, and you get into some place in Orkney, and the women will see your boat coming and go out and open the door and to the shop, and there's like blocks of black cheese and solid bread. she'd be like, "Help yourself, son," and it's just a kind of real honest life, and that was good. And because I did that, that's why I did like volunteer for the lifeboat and went out and did a bunch of that. And that was a really good thing, because you learn things about I think about yourself, but you learn things about other people as well. And you're going to save somebody that's possibly dying, and maybe sometimes you're just bringing back a body to a family. So it's a sort of, people ask, why am I here? Always, oh, why am I here? You're grown up and it's why am I here? But if you can pull somebody out of the water and like either stop them dying or just get them back we get a wee 17-year-old guy and I like just hit him in the back quite a lot of times, and foam shot out his mouth, and then he came back round. So that kind of thing. And then you say, well, it doesn't matter why I'm here, because if I wasn't here, that wee fella wouldn't be here. So he's here. So that's my job. Like that's it done. So it's quite good for that perspective, but also from the kind of, right, okay, something's going wrong. It's no bullshit time, and we're going to go through that wave. And you're going to put yourself in kind of harm's way in the kind of the best possible way, because it's an absolute complete test of your skill and also your leadership, and being able to, when you turn up to a casualty, you want to make sure that somebody's in the radio, that maybe chopper's coming, the other person's get the first aid kit with the correct first aid equipment, that you're going to do particular things and get this person out of the water in a particular way, and how you speak to them. And I always get into trouble for taking my helmet off, because I always like to do this humanizing thing as you got near somebody who's in trouble. Like, I'm just a human. I'm not one of these weirdos with a white helmet and a visor, because, in case something falls in my head out of the sky or something. So it was, the lifeboat was quite good for that sort of no nonsense thing. And it's a bit like when I was in Saudi, a thing happened to me where I was in a car crash and they ended up throwing me in jail, and they were going to like do things to me that weren't probably quite good in terms of long life. So I was in a bit of trouble there for quite a period of time, and I had to sort of do things which were, from the outside, they probably looked like, that guy's bonkers. He's just went into these police people, and I mean, I was told not to look at this guy in the eye, and I stared at him in the eye, and that kind of, I'm across the desk and you're dead. And the fat guy beside you with the machine gun, that's getting taken off him, and I'm shooting that other fellow over there, and you're out of here. And the lifeboat was a bit like that as well. It was a bit sort of, there's a part of you, and it's not a brave part. It's kind of, you go past fear and you get to the, right, this is going to happen here, and it might mean that you're not here after it or whatever, but this is going to happen, and that person that's in that water is coming out of that water, and they're going to be breathing. I might not be, but they will be. And there's that kind of, I don't know, I think when you've done that and then you do that kind of thing, then you kind of realize what fear is, and it's nothing. And so you just don't have it, because it's a kind of pointless thing. And that is quite a good thing to learn as well, that like go into a situation which is, the lifeboat wasn't terrifying like that. The Saudi thing was more terrifying because there was guys with guns and shit like that. But going past that kind of point of fear, and what got me through the Saudi thing actually was listening to Scottish battle music. Unfortunate for the Saudi folk, but okay for me, because that was it. Right, if I'm going, you're all coming with me. But the lifeboat wasn't as just as death-defying as that. It was a bit dangerous at times, but it did, I think, being driven to the point of thinking that your last minute was a couple of minutes ago is quite a good thing.
Sorry, I lost you a bit there. I don't know what happened.
No worries.
we're,
No
we're,
worries.
no, this is exactly. I always say this every time we have anything. Like this is exactly the reason why we need a safe network because it's just
Absolutely.
not
Absolutely.
not only are we being listened to, but it's a clunky machine as well. So.
Yeah, you get cut off if you sort of mention Google or something. You sometimes get cut off. But yeah, so no, I think things like that are good life experiences to put things in perspective. That's the important thing.
No, on a technical one, and I've kind of had a few insights of knowing a few coders over my living and being amongst them, and one of the things that always surprises me when people ask me, "Oh, what do you think people who work in this industry what will surprise you most?" And I'm fascinated with this. Is the keyboard with no letters or numbers on it.
Yeah.
And then you get into this whole geeky level about okay, you need springs and certain heat waves
Aye.
and all this sort of stuff. But my one to you on a technical level, when you are either like you say tinkering around with your machines or you're
Aye.
coding, do you tend to do that in silence or do you listen to music? And what time do you sort of feel most creative? Because from my discussions with people, I've always found that it's something similar to me. I think it's around the sleep process. So it's either just before I go to bed or just as I wake up, I have this real surge of creativity.
Yeah.
And again, is this something that is a common to you?
Yeah, I think probably about 1 or 1:30 in the morning is when I sort of kick into sort of deep thought, and it's kind of at the point where you think you're so tired you really need to go to sleep. And when I was like writing the designs for the Safe Network, was that 8 month thing when I was in the Czech Republic, I had to do a lot of it by lying down, like and thinking and not moving any, like not dedicating any of your thought process to moving limbs and stuff. And I think it's similar to this when you're working on an issue, like you have to get, I don't know, a piece of music, or you have to get a problem. Like I've got a whiteboard here and I just keep rubbing that off and filling it up, and I've got all these A3 pads. So I just go through this process at that time of thinking. And the remarkable thing is, I'll either stand up to go to bed, like quite late, and think I've got it, and then I'll be there for another 4 hours, like writing it all out, or I'll go to bed, not have it, and first thing in the morning, I'll know what the thing was. And if I can't get it after a few nights like that, then you start thinking this is a more serious problem. It has to have to look deeper. But I think it probably is. It's probably late at night when you're really tired. But as well, during the day, we've got Slack and we've got all these different communication tools. Like there's the forum, there's Twitter, there's Slack, there's email. And I think we've got, I don't know, we've got about 14 Slack channels, and they're all beep, beep, beep all the time. So during the day, you're kind of more in mechanical mode, like doing things. You're not really in the sort of creative mode as such. So I think after you've had some of our days just now are just horrendously, like really, really, really busy. And you get to maybe 6 or 7 o'clock and you think, oh, I'm going to die, I have to sleep. And then you just keep going, and then about 10 or 11, you start settling down again to more and more work. And say around about 1 o'clock, I think, is the time it just seems to be the most creative time for me anyway.
Yeah, I mean, there's an old, and it's again, there's so many areas that we scratched upon that we haven't even gone down rabbit holes. But I'm not even going to go down the Bill Hicks rabbit hole. But there's a Bill Hicks one where he says, the analogy about every comedian wants to be a rock star and every rock star wants to be a comedian. And I know you were back in the day. You were back in a band and stuff like that. So if you weren't doing what you were doing right now, what would be your rock star moment to be the comedian, or what would be the one thing if you could take all this away and put it away? SafeNet, it's been done. It's up and built. Where am I going to find David Irvine? What you're going to be doing? Are you going to be sitting there writing code, or are you going to be out in the middle of nowhere, or are you going to be playing music?
Well, the reason for the Safe Network is for me to do some things, and one of them is this sort of proper intelligence, not artificial intelligence, but to work on the sort of deeper stuff about proteomics and genomics, so like life extension technology and targeted medicines by connecting all the sort of medical machines together. So that's a thing that I'm quite focused on, but we need the safe network to work for that, so that we can have this ability to securely share certain information that would allow us to analyze things. So when this is up and running, I'll be doing that. But I spend a lot of time outside, so probably end up in the country for sure. And like even at the office, I'll sit. Well, you know where I sit. I sit out at the back and I'll look at like the wee animals in the woods. So some folk find me generally at the back of the office, sitting in amongst all the weeds, looking at maybe a grasshopper or something for hours. So I like all that sort of stuff, but I do that sort of to get inspiration to work, you know, because it's like the grounding thing. It's like, well, you know, when I was in London recently, I was leaning against a tree wondering, God, that tree must have been planted when there was no cars and all the rest of it, and it was able to breathe proper air. And you know, how if you could have a camera on that tree since it was just the wee seedling, must be quite amazing the changes it's seen through life. So all those sort of things I find fascinating, and things like how does the Canadian tree frog survive when it freezes into a block of ice and then defrosts, and this sort of thing, traveling to different planets. Is the speed of light really a constant? Which I don't think it is, and I've got a lot of reasons for that. But then things like the number theory system, the prime number postulates and whatnot, those are fantastic. So I spent a lot of time with it, like all the prime stuff, like the zeta function, and you know this. So I've got this notion about primes and binary trees that's quite good, looking at the kind of Riemann function, which is a kind of just a weird thing. But my sort of thinking is that the number system is really quite wrong, and that there's probably a completely different language that we should be using to talk about technology and numbers, basically, because the prime numbers are kind of a little bit. The prime numbers 0 and infinity are sort of great big warning signals to me that, well, you're wrong. The things that you're doing is wrong. So, you know, maybe numbers aren't linear. Maybe there is this kind of non-euclid, and it's one of the things about XOR which I find interesting, that it's not a linear numbering system, but it gives us this great power. And you think, well, what else is in threes? And there's a lot of stuff in twos, like cell division, you know, splitting into twos. Then there's other groups of threes in nature which are very interesting. So I think, like, looking at all that sort of stuff, that's probably what I would be doing if I wasn't doing this.
And again,
I would be a total pain in the arse to everybody. Yeah. Here's that guy, don't stand beside him at parties.
No, I mean, I think that's fascinating, because I mean, you mentioned that there, and it's so true. Again, it goes back to me as an artist, or again, especially if you're a musician, you start to see these patterns and these recognitions. And what I think is fascinating, it's kind of been the kind of thing with what we've been talking about, is that it's not so much what you know. I think this is almost a mentality where it's with music and it's with art, or whether it's with computer coding or anything you're doing. It's trying to break away from the like you just spoke upon eruditely then, the fixed mindset of like saying, well, no, this chord works with that chord. That's why particularly I know it's something, you know, we both have a kind of, you know, a fascination with that dissident music, as in fact it plays with the chords that aren't supposed to be, you know, the church given chords. And I think it's like you just said, it's seeing. This is one of the I think fascination maybe about the heart of being a creative person, is you look at what's around you, like we've been speaking about. You see, okay, that works. This is great, but it's more of the how can I take things apart, and equally questioning everything and looking at, actually, we've been told that the prime numbers, or we've been told that this works with that, or that color doesn't. It's what you do and how you push that. And this is one of the things I think ties it really back. And I think it's one of the things that whatever happens with the safe network, I mean, you've stepped into and what you're attempting to build is phenomenal. I mean, and you know that, and it is that real vision, and whether it happens or doesn't happen, it's what I really look forward to is when we can get over this mindset that's kind of, I think, where we are at this point where we are in civilization, where we are just been breaking through all these barriers have been, like you said, whether it's been numbers, we've been told this, whether it's been everything else. And this is what, to me, you set upon a great mission to go out and do this, because a safe network will do that. Because to me, one of the greatest potentials I see about the safe network is the ability for every human being and everyone to communicate with everyone, and that just helps the commonwealth of knowledge. And from that, we don't get barriers, so we don't get stuck in these mindsets, so then anything can be come into play. And that alone, that one achievable thing, although it's ridiculously hard, and we've got so many of years of corporations and how the things are being structured against us, okay, but the vision is worth running for and going for, because once it's achieved, it's going to unleash the amount of human potential this is going to unleash. To me, is going to, I don't think any of us, I think in some ways we're going to look back, maybe if we do lucky enough to get to 30, 40 years time, we'll look back and think, wow, we were such fortunate days to live in the times when we had the ability to shape this.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And that's it. It's I think it's all about seeing something, going for it, and then executing it. And that's what's good about now where we are, is doing the alphas and all this sort of stuff. It's just like, shit, man, this stuff works. And that's it. It's like, let's do the polishing and tidying and clean up the windows and stuff and send this out. And it's now it gets interesting, because it's all about, it's kind of like Tim Berners-Lee said, there's the internet, like there's HTML. And I think that's what Maidsafe sort of doing. Like these bunch of tools here are pretty powerful, do things now. And the things that people will do with it will blow our minds, I think. I think it will blow. I think even seeing some of the stuff like Harman's doing, like Decorum project, and Mark yesterday released this project on the Safe Network, which I was speaking to Viv about it today. It's an amazing thing that Mark's done, like Happy Being. He's just done this sort of like to-do list where you put your favorite drinks in, but it's based on a particular library that shows, and he's tied that into Safe Network. But this other library gives an API that's been used by hundreds of projects, and that means that it would tie into all sorts of. So you can see very quickly that this will just go like crazy. And I think over the next 6 months, see if we get this right, people will say, who's Maidsafe? But they'll all know what a Safe Network is. And that's what I've been looking for a while. It's like, not that we'll disappear, because we'll be working our arses off, and we'll be, doing what we're doing. We'll have a bigger team and everything, but folk will be using a particular app, and I don't know what app that could, like N99, it could be anything, and say, oh, this has changed our lives. Somebody will say, that's something to do with Maidsafe. And like, who's that? And they won't want to know. And you don't need to know. And that is when it's going to be, that's when we're going to have done it. And I think we're getting to the point now where these other projects are starting to look like they're going to surprise a lot of the bigger companies. And I think some of these guys doing these projects are going to scare the living daylights out of some of the bigger companies, and that is brilliant, because they'll have our backing for sure. I mean, we'll be cheering them on. But it's definitely good days. Definitely good days.
I think it's without being nationalistic, because I don't think we are just on a rock, but man, I think it's, and I think you spoke about it earlier on in the conversation, and I think it's, to me, very inspiring that this isn't, and I don't mean this as a slight towards America at all, but to me, it's very inspiring this has been built in a small little part on the west coast of Scotland, because I think, going back to what all we've been talking about, as there is something about a place and culture that does help. And I know that Maidsafe in particular have people from all around the world, but there's something about the place, the environment, the ability, for instance, that it's why a lot of the great innovations have always come from this part of the world, because as you know, I mean, we're entering that period of time now where that winter closes in, and our 1 week of sunshine's gone, and now it's bunkered down, heads down, and work. And I think that's what I find really inspiring. Well, before we do wrap this up, David, is there anything you would like to sort of add? And
No, I think just on that point there, it was quite interesting. I was at a thing about privacy last week or the week. Oh, maybe it was a few weeks ago. I don't know. Time just shoots by me. And it was a minister, one of the SNP ministers that was beside me, and they were talking about this encryption thing where the government's going to stop encryption, like this IP bill. And it was quite interesting to be talking about, oh yeah, we're going to stop it and all the rest, blah, blah, blah. And I think that's a bit like what you're talking about, the Scottish culture, because then like these two people, one was this minister, and she's on Question Time tonight actually, and another woman who was the head of some privacy thing. She was the head of some privacy thing, one of these EFF things. Surprisingly, didn't know too much though, and they were saying, oh, this is terrible, this IP thing, and blah, blah, blah. And they were saying, well, this is this kind of engineer. And it was almost like, oh, there's the kind of car mechanic guy here. So I was the guy in the panel that was the techie. And it was quite interesting because my approach was, these politicians here and stuff, they'll babble on about this stuff, but it's not going to happen. It can't happen. It's impossible to happen. And they were like, oh, no, it's terrible. It's going to, we've got these bills going through Parliament and we're going to stand up against them and everything. And I was just saying to the crowd, you ignore this shit. Just ignore this IP bill. And they were saying, but the government will come and close you down. And I said, how can they close me down? The code's out there, we're there. And then they're saying, well, they'll force you to put a back door in it. And I said, well, can't put a back door in it. It's not possible. You'd have to rewrite the whole system. Who's going to pay for that? And I think that's a part of the kind of Scottish thing. It's like I'm a way to pick a fight kind of thing. It's quite an interesting thing. Folk say, you're in Scotland, this IP bill's going to come along and the government's going to chap on your door and make you do something. And you think, you need to learn about us, because that's not going to happen. It's just not going to happen. And I couldn't think of anything that would be more funny than a government agent champing the door and saying, I think you should stop doing what you're doing, because I think that'd be hilarious. And folk don't get that. This is not where you do that kind of stuff. And it's, I think you're right, though. I think there is a certain culture in certain parts of the world. And I think one of the kind of cultures that we've got here in this part of the world is the, we'll put up with stuff, and then it just, no, that's not happening. And nothing will make that happen. It'll just be impossible. So I think that is probably a bad thing in lots of ways, but a good thing in some ways when you're involved in projects like this, that you can just say, there's nothing you can do. We've open sourced the code, we've done this, we've done the next thing, we've got other people all over the world working on this. It's sort of, your tea's out, there's nothing. And I do like that. I do like that about Scotland, and I like that about the west of Scotland, that there's no, you'll just have to kill us approach. So, and that's fine. And that's never an easy thing to kill some of us, because we're a bit tough. But no, I think you're right. I think it's sometimes good that some of these things happen like this, but it's another reason for other people to be coding this network, so it belongs to the world. And I'm hoping that we're able to announce some stuff in the next few weeks that people will see, holy shit, this has just went global, and that'll be good.
Well, I mean, again, it's been an absolute, pleasure talking to you tonight, David. And I have to sort of say on behalf, and and I think it's worth sort of reiterating, just solely because, like many creative people, we tend to, as you were quite speaking upon earlier on, it's the only important thing to you is what's ahead of you, not backwards. But and I think sometimes we can get stuck in a mindset of always being like that. But hence the reason I'm going to say what I'm saying. you are inspiring great many people, and there's a lot of people out there, and people you're never going to meet, people, you know, and they're not the people I'm talking about that aren't the ones that are coming to me and saying when. They're just saying, great, almost the other way around. Let's shield this guy. Let's try to let's just get, because it is a grand vision, and as much as you're trying to spend your lifetime trying to, with people, get them to understand the vision, there's a great deal of many creative people that I know personally that understand the vision, and you know, and it's all power to you, and that's what I'm saying. Just keep it doing, because for all those hours when, like a lot of us, when we're stuck in the rooms, we don't realize maybe what the effects we're having out there. But you know, your small little vision that started off all those years ago is truly inspiring many people. And that's what I'm saying. I look forward to the day, like you say, because all these things have been like, well, we can get to the point of thinking, well, okay, why do we have to do? Why is it us? Why is it being left to us to build this? You know what I mean? And we can sit down and have a real, and just be looking in a world that's post safe network, and where these things aren't like, we're having to struggle to build them. It's more like, okay, we've now got the printing press, we've now got the car, we've now got the network, and those days are going to come. And that's what I'm saying. To me, it's not about, like you were saying earlier on, it's not about putting any grand, you know, dates on it or rushing out. It's getting it done properly. And to me, that's all that's important. If it takes 2 years more, 10 years more, 20 years, I don't care. It's, to me, it's get the job properly, and to me, I think it's really inspiring. Well, look, David, it's been an absolute pleasure, and as I said before, and you know, this door's always open, and there's so much that we haven't spoken about, we haven't even touched upon. So you know, these for future conversations. But you know, from me over here in, well, it's not often I get to say this, and I do love saying, well, from over here in Guruk and from down there in Troon, it's been a great one, and for everyone else, life is people.
Thanks a lot, Tim.
Brilliant.